2026 will likely be the year that we see the greatest house price crash in Australian property history, and it's already begun. If you've been watching the news recently, you may likely have seen the latest warning signs, and yesterday was the first day that officially signaled the turn of the average house price across all 5 major capitals. The average Sydney homeowner has lost 60k in the last 3 months from the value of their home, and that's the average. Obviously, some are much worse than that. And if these falls continue, and they likely will, we're on track to see the largest price decline from top to bottom ever recorded. Hi guys, Jono here. As someone who's bought hundreds of properties over the last decade, I have never seen the market as fearful as it is right now. The question isn't will the market crash, it's how bad is this crash going to be and who is going to be the most impacted, and will everyone be impacted? Buying a property is obviously one of the largest financial decisions anyone makes. Get it wrong and it can be disastrous for your financial future. So if you're a homeowner or a renter or looking to buy a home, then you're probably going to want to watch this. So in this video, I'm going to break down who's hurting the most, what areas are falling the hardest, so you know which areas you may be best to avoid. What's actually causing all of this, including the most influential thing that is often not spoke about, and how much worse could it get? And finally, we'll look at why are there some areas that are still looking like they're going to grow. So if you are looking to buy still, that you know where it may be the safest to do so. All right, so who is bleeding the most at the moment and where are you likely best to avoid? Well, we have to start out with the biggest market in Australia, which is Sydney, and my goodness me, it is not pretty for most Sydney homeowners right now. Behind me, you have the latest CoreLogic data showing the median change in values over the last 3 months. And as you can see, it's a bloodbath. So just for context, the red is bad, and the darker the red, the worse it is. And blue is good. The darker the blue, the better it is. And as you can see, Sydney is, it's a bloodbath. So places like Eastwood, down sort of 7.9% over the last 3 months. Belrose, 6.2% over the last 3 months. Blacktown, 4.2% over the last 3 months. And what you can see behind me here is what those mean in terms of the dollars that people would be losing from their house, and then if they continued, how much that would equate to over a year. And it's a lot of money. So as you can see at the bottom there, the average Sydney homeowner lost nearly 60,000 off the value of their house over the last 3 months, which is pretty horrific. And if that trend continues, which, based on the sort of latest auction clearance rates, it's not looking great, that would be 223,000 of value lost over their home in the next 12 months, which is, pretty horrendous. All right, and now let's come across to the second biggest market in Australia, which is Melbourne, and it ain't much prettier. It's another Red Sea. So just to summarize some of the areas that are hurting at the moment in Melbourne. So places like Box Hill, Brunswick West, Burwood East, all recording significant declines over the last 3 months that would equate to hundreds of thousands of dollars if the trends over the last 3 months continued over the next year. Melbourne, as an average, it dropped, the value of a Melbourne home owner dropped by just over 30,000 in the last 3 months, which is quite considerable, and if it continues would be 120,000 for the year, which is a lot of money. So not pretty at all. So behind me now, you're going to see Perth, and it's obviously not so bad at the moment. Brisbane as well looks pretty blue for the main part. Adelaide, also similar, but as I say, based on the feedback on the ground, it's pretty horrendous. I saw a Instagram post from Tom Panos last night, who said it's the worst auction weekend he's ever had in 30 years. So I think that really summarizes the sentiment at the moment. All right. And I was at an event over the weekend with a friend who's been a buyer's agent for over 20 years, and some of his staff, they buy a lot for owner-occupiers, like in the major capitals at the higher end, and they had never seen it as rough as it is in their 20 years. Some of them were looking for jobs after not having bought a property for a client in nearly 3 months. So it's definitely turning. All right, so let's cover the main reasons why the markets across the country largely are falling quite hard or turning to start to fall. The last one is probably the most influential that we're going to cover, but it's the one that's spoken about the least. So first we're going to talk about supply. So this is pretty constrained at the moment. It's very important, but it's not really what's going to cause any price movement because it's extremely tight. So to summarize, we had 500,000 people come into the country last year, give or take, and we built 180,000 houses. And it's projected that we're going to have pretty similar population growth over the next 5 years, whilst there's a great divergence, so difference between the amount of houses being approved and the amount of houses being built, because it's not profitable at the moment for developers to build, largely because of the amount of taxes that are involved to build a home. So this is not really looking like it's going to change, but it is influential, so it is important to watch. So that's supply. Let's talk about something that's more influential at the moment, which is people's ability to buy. So the amount of credit that is available, which has gone down since the beginning of the year, mainly because inflation is up. And so the RBA has raised rates to 4.35%. And based on the latest market projections, it seems like we are in for at least another 1, maybe 2 rate rises before the end of the year, before next year we start to see it be pulled back again. We've also had some other influences to credit. So the government has given first home buyers credit by the 5% deposit schemes, but it's taken away credit from investors by the changes that have been made to negative gearing because of the ability now, or the lost ability for investors to be able to claim any losses, so they don't get that income. They've removed income, so removed credit. So credit is down overall, and therefore that is going to have overall a negative influence on people's ability to buy property, although not everywhere, of course, and not equally. So first home buyers do have extra ability, whereas investors do not. So it will impact different areas differently, but broadly, this is a negative influence. All right, so the most influential is confidence. So consumer confidence. This is the thinking of people in the future. How are things going to be? Are they going to be better or are they worse? If they think they're going to be worse, then they're going to pull back likely on major financial decisions. And as you can see, consumer confidence is as low as it's ever been, pretty much. Only around sort of COVID time temporarily, or 2008 financial crisis have we ever seen it quite this low. And it's obviously for good reason. Like, we've got multiple headwinds that are being reported through the media 24/7 to us, which is the war, the cost of living crisis. We've got inflation at really high levels. We've got interest rates, as we've just mentioned, that are high and they're likely to go higher. And then we've got AI sort of on the horizon, potentially going to take a lot of people's jobs. So there is plenty to scare people right now into not making a big financial decision, and that's exactly what they're doing. So to summarize, we have got on the supply not much change, but what we have got is negativity in consumer confidence and then credit, which is ultimately what is on an aggregate scale pushing the price. All right, so now let's apply these 3 influences and look at another market and see, is it bleeding as bad everywhere, or are there some areas that are holding up okay and might still hold up okay over the next sort of short term? So let's look at down south Hobart. You can see it behind me here. Looking pretty good, dark blue everywhere, meaning good annualized growth. I'll also show you the sort of top 3 suburbs, or some of the best performing suburbs over the last 3 months, and how that would look if it continued over the next 12 months. And you can see it's a stark difference, obviously, to somewhere like in the suburbs in Sydney and Melbourne that we looked at before. So Why is that the case? Well, if we look at supply in Hobart, it's the same as it is everywhere else in Australia pretty much. They're not building enough houses. There's positive migration because of government spending, people coming in to fulfill those jobs. So no real differences there. But in terms of credit, it's much less damaging in a market like Hobart to have had a couple of interest rate rises and maybe some cost of living increases, because compared to what people are earning and spending on houses there is still quite a lot of buffer. So because a lot of house prices there, sort of 500, 600, 700,000, and incomes are pretty good compared to those house prices, it's not going to have be such a tipping point for the market there, because there's capacity within people's incomes for those costs to rise. And then also when you look at investors, they are also still very active in Hobart, because it's one of the only places you can still get a house that's not going to cost you, 15, 20,000 a year to hold on to. You can buy a house there for sort of 600, 700,000. Maybe it's renting for $600, $700 a week. And so, it might only cost you a few thousand a year to actually hold on to it. Whereas if you're looking at buying in Sydney right now, it's going to cost you, 30,000 a year to hold on. So you've still got people there, the locals who can afford it. You've still got investors active in that market who are not so impacted. And then if you look at confidence, confidence is influenced a lot by the perception of job stability and also affordability. So given, as we've described, that affordability is not so impacted there, and jobs is pretty strong because of infrastructure spend that's going on, confidence is probably not as badly impacted there. There's a lot of blue collar work as well, so probably less concern in the short term as well about any potential changes through AI. So you can see now how in this area there is a slight difference, and it means that prices even may still grow quite strongly in this sort of medium term. I'm not saying to just blindly go out and buy in Hobart, but there are some other areas that similar-ish kind of things apply. So I'll put some of them behind me now, and you can see we've got Lonnie in Tasmania, we've got Darwin, we've got some of the unit markets in Melbourne also still showing signs of life, and have different impacts by these current influences on the broader market. So I think it's important to remember that each house is technically its own property market. Each house is in a neighborhood, each neighborhood is in a council, and each council is in a region. There's 537 local councils, and there's 15,000 suburbs and 11 million houses. So when people say house prices are falling, they are talking about the average of all of those 11 million houses. It doesn't necessarily mean that your house is falling, your house price is falling, or your neighbors is falling, or the people that are thousands of miles away is falling. There are differences. Is this actually a crash, or is this a little bit more nuanced? I know that the media is fixated on the short term because the fear drives the clicks, but let's look at the long-term performance. Australia has been through multiple corrections before, and it will probably do so again, but it's always come out of them. Corrections are sort of part of the normal process of a market, and it's kind of normal. We can't have price growth going up as fast as it's been over the last 5 years, year after year after year. It's actually, in some ways, quite a good thing. So I think, if you're sort of sat on the sidelines right now, a good question to ask is, do you believe in Australia fundamentally? Because if you do believe in Australia, it may not be the worst time to invest. And Australia is the highest wealth per person in the world, aside from Luxembourg, which, no disrespect to Luxembourg, doesn't really count because it has so few people. But when I sort of got off the boat arrived in Australia 14 years ago from the UK, I couldn't believe how good it was compared to where I'd come from. And I think it's the same for everyone who's arriving here each year. And will arrive here each year. And I'm not saying that things aren't getting worse here based on a lot of measures, but have you seen everywhere else as well? And so you just got to kind of decide, what your choice is in this moment, because if you believe in Australia and you believe in over the long term that we will come out of what might likely be quite a serious crash or correction, then it's probably not the worst time to buy. And as I say, there's always been markets, even when the broader market was crashing, that have performed well, and we've touched into some of those that might be the potential for those this time. I want to finish on the long-term performance of the property market, and also what the long-term performance is of the other option, which I see a lot of people taking right now, which is sitting in cash. And this is what ultimately got me to invest in property some time ago. And so if you look at property over the last sort of 50 years in Australia, or 40 years, it's grown on average about 7%. If you look at cash over the same period, it's lost value on average by about 3%. So yes, of course, there's years where a property doesn't grow, but if you look over the long term, you should be absolutely fine, or history suggests you should be absolutely fine. And the other main benefit, of course, is the leverage. So yes, you get 7% on average over the last 40 years, but when you factor in the fact that you can borrow 80% of your gain, you basically are getting like 35%. Because most people are borrowing like 5 to 1. So the average actual return on cash is like 35% over the last 40 years versus negative 3%. And that's what people are currently choosing to invest in right now, largely raw. So yeah, to put it in context, if you can buy and you can afford to hold, it's probably never been the better time. And if you need any help deciding what to do, you want to review your portfolio, see whether maybe it's time to sell, or maybe you can buy in this challenging time, please feel free to reach out. I'll leave the links in the description, and good luck.